I grew up in Brisbane in the 1940s. My auntie, who was a wonderful mentor to me, lived at Barton in the foothills of Mount Cootha, and she had 4 macadamia trees, and they were all very different with their characteristics. She used to harvest the nuts and dry them, and when we'd visit them, we used to crack them in a vice and put them in a frying pan with butter, and then the whole family would love them. And that's where I developed my taste and passion for the macadamia nut. My background was in food science or food technology, and I worked for a large Australian food manufacturer who processed peanuts and almonds and cashews, and I convinced them that macadamias were a nut of the future. So they sent me to Hawaii to study macadamia technology in Hawaii. So I came back to Australia and in 1974-75 built a macadamia processing factory. Every macadamia tree in the world, and there's probably about 100 million macadamia trees have been planted globally, every one of them originated from Australia's rainforests. And they're really only 2, 3 or maybe 4 generations out of the rainforest. Macadamias over millions of years retreated to little favourable niches in the rainforest, and with European settlement, up to 90% of the wild macadamia trees have been lost. Residential development, fire, farming, weeds have all caused a massive loss of them. The Australian government has classified macadamias as threatened or vulnerable or endangered, and these laws allow or support the conservation or protection of wild macadamia trees. It's important to conserve macadamias because firstly they're part of Australia's flora and fauna. They're being steadily lost, but the commercial macadamia industry is based on a tiny genetic fraction of the available trees. We simply do not know how important the genetics of the wild trees are and how diverse they are. It is quite possible that there will be massive improvements in productivity and adaptability that come from our wild genetic resources. There was an increasing realisation that Australia's wild macadamias were being progressively lost, and in the late 1980s a major survey was undertaken of the wild macadamias, and so based on that survey, cuttings were then taken from the wild trees, and 3 wild arboretums, or we called them germplasm libraries, were established, and the purpose of them was to conserve for all time as living plants the genetics that came from those trees. The Macadamia Trust was formed by a group of passionate enthusiasts who all believed in the cause, and so the Macadamia Trust was formed later and became a registered environmental organisation with the Australian government. The first step when the Macadamia Conservation Trust was formed was to prepare what we call a recovery plan, and that was a detailed list of the wild macadamias, where they were located, the risks they were facing, but more particularly the actions that needed to be taken to conserve them. And that recovery plan was adopted by the Australian government, and that became our blueprint. Wild macadamias are being continually lost, and one of the catchphrases we use is that extinction is forever. So every wild macadamia tree that's lost is lost forever unless we're able to conserve its DNA or genetics. And one of the major advances has been in genetic research that has enabled us to understand how different wild populations may be. The industry has been very supportive of the need to conserve our wild macadamias, and we've achieved a lot, but it is ongoing. It will never end. And funding has been a major problem because there were so many things that we wanted to do, and we're limited by total resources. But we've had a wonderful bunch of people who have all been dedicated to achieving that. For 130 years, there had only been 3 species of macadamias found, and one time in the 1980s, Jan and I heard that macadamias had been found 300 kilometres further north of their natural habitat, and it turned out to be a completely new species. Originally 23 trees were found. Now 130 trees have been found, and it is actually as rare as the Wallamai pine and is as threatened as the Wallamai pine. It's called Macadamia jansenii after a Ray Jansen, who was one of the people who originally found it, but it was believed to be a commercial macadamia, and it took several years of research by taxonomists to determine that it was a completely new species that has got quite different characteristics that could well contribute in future breeding of the macadamia. And when we saw it, we simply did not know what to think. And as I said, it took several years of collecting nuts. It was a miracle that we found nuts, because the rats, the few nuts that were produced, the rats would eat. So we fortunately found flowers and nuts, and this enabled the taxonomists to be able to determine that it was a complete new species. Yes, the Macadamia jansenii grows in very isolated, high country parts of the Great Dividing Range, and a fire swept through there in December 2019, and 30% of the macadamia trees were burnt. We believed they were lost, but some of them are now recovering. Macadamia jansenii has got different characteristics. It's a small nut. It is slightly bitter, but that bitterness disappears in breeding. But quite possibly its main advantage will be that it's growing further north in a hotter climate, and it may be resistant to global warming or temperature increases. But even more importantly is that it requires very little cold over winter for the flowers to be initiated. So it could well be that the genes from Macadamia jansenii will be able to enable the commercial industry to continue if global temperatures rise. Jan and I had our own macadamia orchard for 33 years in Gympie, and one of our interests was to experiment with breeding or selecting new macadamia varieties. And we were given over 200 tiny little seedling trees, and were told that they came from good parents. And out of them came one tree which was quite outstanding. It seemed to perform to a far higher level, a more elite level than any other macadamia we'd seen. So when Jan and I sold our orchard, we donated that tree, or the rights to it, to the Macadamia Conservation Trust, and they took out plant breeder rights or patent. And that means that every nursery tree that is sold attracts a royalty, and this has raised significant funds for the Macadamia Conservation Trust. MCT1 is very precocious. It will produce a crop in its second or third year. It has a very thin, even shell and a high kernel recovery, and it is very hardy. Also, it is not a large tree, which means that there are less management problems with it when it's fully mature. So it has provided funds that has enabled significant more conservation work to be undertaken. We have been looking for initiatives to educate the public about the importance of conserving the wild macadamia. We have found an area, a national park, where there are walkways and there are wild macadamias. And we have created what we call Walk with Wild Macadamias, where people can walk through a beautiful rainforest and see macadamias growing in their natural environment. The Walk with Wild Macadamias is in rainforest at Amamore, a little southwest of Gympie, and in the Noosa hinterland. The history of the macadamia nut has never been recorded, and so one of my interests has been to write the history of the macadamia nut. It's called The Macadamia Story, and it describes how macadamias evolved 30 million years ago, how Aboriginal people treasured the macadamias, about the early botanists, about the pioneers who were passionate about macadamias, and how the modern industry has grown from 30 tonnes in the 1960s to 50,000 tonnes per year now. I've been very fortunate with my life because I've made my work my hobby, and I've been involved with macadamia nuts now for probably for 60 years. And it's been a wonderful, absorbing vacation, and I've had a ball.